I'm about to cook supper, and I thought you might want to watch me cook supper because I'm going to be making fried okra. Okra is how most people say it. Okra is how I grew up saying it. And you've probably had fried okra before. I have. I've had it at restaurants and different places. But typically when I'm out somewhere and I order fried okra, if it's on the menu because I really like it, or maybe if it's on the buffet or something, it's not like the fried okra that I grew up eating. Granny always made fried okra in the summertime when we would have a garden, but hers was much more lightly breaded. A lot of times the things that you buy in a restaurant somewhere, or you maybe see on the buffet, like I was talking about, is like a heavily breaded, so you can't really see the okra for the outside little bread, and kind of like a little nugget of okra, and that's really good. It's great, but that's not how I grew up eating it, nor how I make it today. So the way that I make it, and the way that is the same way Granny made it, is with a very light coating of cornmeal on it, and it's fried that way. So what else are we going to have? We're going to have fried okra. I'm going to open, I like the nights when I can open a jar of deer meat because it's so easy. It's already cooked, so we're going to have deer meat. I've got some biscuits. I've already got some soupy potatoes, which is really just stewed potatoes, but all my growing up years we called them soupy potatoes. So I've got some soupy potatoes going, and then I've picked a mess of Malabar spinach from the garden, still going strong even though this is late September, the last day of September actually today, so we're going to have that. So I think it's going to be a pretty good meal. So now I'm ready to cut up my okra, but before I do that I'm going to put my biscuits in because my oven has come up to temperature. So the size of your okra that you cut is really up to you, the size that you want it to be. You don't want it so thin that it just falls apart, but you know, you don't want it so thick that it would take forever. And there's so many different ways to do things, of course, that everyone has their own way. I was reading today an interesting little part. I was looking to see if any of my cookbooks said anything about fried okra, and I noticed in the Sydney Sailor Farr, More Than Moonshine, one of my favorite Appalachian cookbooks, she actually, her little recipe said that they took small little pods of okra and then they boiled them and then they fried them. So I've never heard of that. That's a different, but you can for sure share your recipe with me, the way that you grew up eating okra, or maybe you don't even like it. Some people don't like okra. You can see the reason why. You can see it's got the sticky stuff in it, the kind of slimy stuff, but that's never bothered me. So, and of course once you fry it you don't notice that as much anyway. My okra's not done as good this year as it usually does, but it is producing some. Some people don't, they discard the little ends like I'm doing, and other people eat them, so that again is up to you. I would just make sure that your pieces are mostly uniform so that it cooks, cooks the same. I mean, cooks all at once, evenly. Keep hitting my bowl with my knife there and making a clanging. These pieces of okra, this one right here is kind of iffy. It was hiding out in the refrigerator and I missed it the last time I used okra, but I'm going to try to use it anyway. Maybe it'll be alright mixed in with the stuff that's fresher. First video that I ever put up has a sweet story about okra in it. I'll link to it below so you can go find out what my story about okra in it was. Sweet story about okra and Granny. Now this is not a whole lot of okra, but the only people eating tonight are me and Matt, so it'll be plenty for us. You can use whatever spices you'd like. I've seen people put garlic, salt, and different things, but I just stick to salt and pepper. It's usually all I use on my okra. Now I just sprinkle some cornmeal over it. Doesn't take too much to coat it. And just stir it around. So you can see that's a very light coating of cornmeal. No like the batter kind, which that's good too. This is just kind of, and growing up in Appalachia, this is what I grew up eating. Was this just a light coating of cornmeal. If you want to let this sit for a few minutes, or you could let it sit beforehand, it'll give the chance for some of that sticky stuff to come out, and it'll make it a little bit thicker. But for me, I just go ahead and toss it, and then I'm ready to put it in the pan once it comes up to heat. So I have the bottom of the pan of the cast iron. You can see here I have it full of enough oil in it to cover the bottom for sure. And then I'm going to use a slotted spoon to kind of shake out the excess cornmeal before I start putting it in it. And a good way to test if your oil's hot enough is to kind of drop a little piece in there, and if you can see a little bit of the cornmeal, see it bubble up. The trickiest part of frying okra to me is to not get too much oil, but to get enough. If you don't get enough, then the cornmeal kind of soaks it all up, and then you don't have enough to actually let it kind of keep from scorching. But if you put too much, then of course it gets soggy. Of course, there are people though that deep fry theirs, so then you're using a tremendous amount of oil. It's just kind of one of those things that you got to play around with. It's kind of like personal preference to figure out what works best for you. You want to try to, you don't have to worry about getting every piece to lay down, but you just want to kind of try to have it in one layer. And then we're just going to be patient, let it cook for about 4 or 5 minutes till it begins to brown, and then you can kind of stir it around. Now the way I make mine is how Granny made hers, is so I'll let it kind of brown and stir it around, and then once it's kind of got a little crust on it, I pop it in the oven for about 5 minutes, and that kind of finishes it off. That's how she did when I was growing up, and that's like a little trick I learned from her. And I'm not sure she did it because I think the best benefit of doing it like that for me is that once I put it in the oven, I don't have to worry about it, you know, keep turning it, because it's just kind of cooking on all sides then. And you just leave it in there for a very few minutes till then it's done to your liking. So while the okra is continuing to cook, I'm going to go ahead and get the deer meat out. So I have a video about canning deer meat where Matt shows how we can deer meat, so you can check that out. You can see this liquid comes up to about right there in the jar. We don't put any liquid in it when we're canning it, so that all comes out of the meat, so it's very flavorful, and I leave that in it when I warm it up. You can see one little tiny piece of fat there. Deer meat is very lean. It hardly has any fat in it. you can see the okra is beginning to get brown on one side. So you can give it a good stir and then let it cook a little bit longer. Now my spinach is beginning to calm down. I had my pan a little hot, but it's also because I washed it and it had water on it. But that water, if you can, you don't want to get burned, but at the same time, the water does help it steam, leaving a little bit of water on it. Sometimes I cook spinach in butter, and the butter doesn't splatter as much as, or spit at you as much as the olive oil does. Now that I've about got everything done, I'm going to put the okra in the oven. I've still got it, it's heated up already since I was making the biscuits, so I'm going to set it in there for about 4 to 5 minutes, and then I think I'll be ready to eat. So if you've never grown Malabar spinach before, last year was the first year I grew it, and I just adore it. I will never have a garden that I don't have it, and it reseeded itself really well this year, so I think it would be easy to say that and never plant it again, that it would just keep coming back. I like to eat it raw, probably mostly is how I eat it, but we love it like this, just cooked like greens. Sometimes I will you can add cream and like some butter to this, a little nutmeg, and it's really good like that. It's kind of like you're making creamed spinach. So we like it both ways, just plain like this. Matt puts lemon juice on his when he eats it, or vinegar, but I just like it just like that. I mean, I don't have to put anything on mine to enjoy it. But if you wanted to, you could certainly throw some butter and some cream in there and cream it up together, and you'd have creamed spinach, and it's very good like that too. You just kind of put enough in there and then kind of let the cream cook out, and then it's done. So now I've got the okra out of the oven. If you do my little trick of putting it in the oven, you just need to keep an eye on it, because it could burn quickly in there because it's already hot. So now I'm going to drain it from the oil, put it on a little paper towel, and then we'll be ready to eat supper. So you can see the okra is just lightly covered with cornmeal. It's not like a batter, like I was saying. So this is the kind of okra that I grew up eating in Appalachia, and that I still make for my family today. We've got some biscuits. Matt loves to put his deer meat with the juice on the biscuits. Oh, I could have got you a spoon that you could have got some juice, huh? Sorry about that. We'll go get you one. Matt says the juice is the best part, so I failed him on the spoon.
It's absolutely the best part.
Soupy potatoes. Pickled beets from the garden. And mulberry jelly for dessert. Well, Matt said it was a mighty fine meal, and I think he was right. It was awful good. I wish you were here so you could eat some of it too, and then you could help me clean up all the mess. You can see behind me that I've got to wash all the dishes up and put everything up now. I'm glad that you stopped by and helped me make supper. I hope you'll leave a comment and tell me, when you make fried okra, if you make fried okra, is it like me, was a barely breaded kind that I grew up eating in Appalachia, or is it more of the really breaded kind that you often get in restaurants? And as always, I hope you'll continue to drop back by often and help me celebrate Appalachia.